hackathon has really gone global, and I think it's helped us all appreciate just how interconnected and how interrelated the food business is. And you know, Melissa made a tremendous presentation early on. Thanks for moving her up. Thank you, Melissa, for making yourself available. And thanks for making yourself available again in the normal time slot. I think the number of people showing up shows that there was a lot left on the table, puns, all puns intended, and a lot of question and answer that we can maybe do a deeper dive now. So I don't know if you want to recap briefly what you covered, but my recollection is, you know, you talked a bit about your company's background as well as some of the other organizations listed. People can see your bio, they may know you already, but you know, major restaurant food chain brands, Chili's, Maggiano's, Cheesecake Factory, Noodles, Inc. You talked a little bit about something I didn't fully understand, the different seasonality, the Salinas season and the Yuma season. We talked a little bit about different packaging and boxing, a little bit about frozen food, and we have the coming presentation a little bit later today. But also about how to reactivate people who've been disaffected in the labor chain. So is there anything from your previous presentation you would like to cover as a recap before we dive a little bit deeper into some of the penetrating questions that have already yielded some of the submissions that the work streams are working on?
I think one of the biggest thing is just thinking about that the fact of the matter that, you know, there has to be the idea that there has to be that restaurants, and I think people understand this in theory, but that restaurants really can't take a full load of produce from field to fork. Like, that's just not a reality. Food banks now coming to like understand their purchasing power a little bit better can do that when they're not, when the donations maybe aren't as heavy as they were at the beginning of COVID. My understanding at the beginning of COVID was that a lot of, the day that COVID happened, that first week, people were donating so much of what was in there. The distributors, like you can imagine, the Cisco's, the US Foods, the distributors, the 100 distributors, 60 plus members and non-members that I work with, they were donating. They lost 80% of their business, and after figuring out some places to sell some of their product, they were donating a lot of their product to the food banks. But at some point, they were flooded with fresh produce. And then right away, they needed to figure out what to do with their product. So at other times, my understanding with food banks, and I'm not an expert on how food banks buy their product, but they can take straight loads. But I'm not sure that they take it all the time from California. I think they have rules that they have to take food from their own state most of the time. But otherwise, restaurants have to have a place where that stuff is broken down, and that is a distribution center. So where I come in is that produce being a very volatile commodity, many times they have distributors that are outside of the broadliner. A broadliner is somebody, I used to always joke that it was toilet paper because it's, you know, including all your different products, and that produce is not toilet paper, but now toilet paper can be like a golden commodity. So I don't like to joke about toilet paper anymore, but you know, that produce is so volatile and moving. And so my company manages the entire from field to fork of produce. So produce has to be taken in by the distributor, broken down into pallets, all the way down to boxes, and then we do splits. So the produce distributor takes it and breaks it down even further, and we put it into split packets, which is, depends on the distributor. We haven't standardized across the country our splits, but we could take things down to the each, and then the restaurant orders it. And so then it comes to the restaurant based on the order that they have. So I saw some wonderful submissions, looking at waste, looking at a lot of technology things. And there are a lot of technology out there in restaurants. My IT department, we have 15 people in my IT, and we create our own IT technology, but there is a lot out there. from menu innovation to ordering to, and I'm not great at all the different AAS and all these different ways, from all the way from how you're ordering it to the creation to having it tied into down to the penny of how, the different ingredients, if you change one ingredient, how it's going to change all the way down to the field. And the truth is when you look at the blockchain, produce is definitely behind, because the produce is very tight all the way to the margins in the produce world is just very tight. So when we look at our blockchain and we look at it, the cost for a lot of these middle-sized distributors to add the scanning in and scanning out, it's just not there yet for all of the people that aren't the Cisco's, the US Foods, and some of these other people. So I saw one submission talking about how some of my customers are pushing for the blockchain to be there. And so it's going to have to come from the bigger players in the space pushing for it and having it go all the way down to the tracking level at the grower. So I don't want to get outside of all of it, but just looking at the submissions, they are wonderful. And I think there's a lot there that could help the industry as a whole.
I think implicit in a lot of those submissions, though, is that there's a way to lean out the intermediary processes, whether making them more efficient or eliminating them entirely, whether it's, more farm to table, more urban farming, vertical farming, or simply, as one of our presenters said earlier, no disrespect to the middleman, but cutting out the middleman. And I think your presentation touched on certainly opening my eyes, and I'm more than a casual observer of the industry, what some of those value adds are. So I want to give you a moment also, not to be defensive about it, but to talk about how the impact of COVID might actually alter the role you play as an intermediary, right? It's not just packaging and moving things. I think consumers are going to have more concerns about quality control going forward. Their palates may change. Certainly their economics may change in terms of what they look for, not just high-end organics, but we touched a little bit on, and I don't want to steal Dylan's thunder, but some people are just really going to go for preserved packaged food. So it's both a supply problem as well as what does the other side look like. And then our seafood presentation brought home something that I had heard anecdotally here in a country that's a seafood producer, a fishery. In fact, it's called the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries here. That because a high proportion in North America, at least, of protein from seafood is served at restaurants as opposed to purchased at grocery stores and cooked at home. Is that going to change when we come out the other side? Are people going to be as concerned about how many touches there have been on the package before they get it, take it home, clean it, or the actual food safety of something, something they're used to just going to their greengrocer area of their favorite grocery store and putting it in a plastic bag or carrying it in their tote. They're going to think twice about. Help us think ahead about what is changing because of COVID, apart from the obvious economics of oversupply here, waste, and then not getting to folks who are consuming.
So I guess I'm not really sure how you could go direct from farm to restaurant unless you're really like in California. I mean, there's greenhouses, there's local, but like there's local that can do maybe like 10%. I sit on the freight farms, which is like growing things in old train containers, shipping containers. But I mean, most of the countries and maybe the world is grown in California and Arizona and then moves throughout our country. So without that supply, I don't know how you would be able to supply the country with fresh produce. And to see the reaction, I mean, we've distributed to health, like let's just say people who can afford fresh produce for a minute. Let's not even talk about people that can't afford it for a moment. Healthcare workers. people that were so busy that just couldn't even buy produce. They just were giving, we provided, you know, fresh produce to healthcare workers. They couldn't get it. The tears that I saw from people that were receiving it when we would hand it to them, to have fresh produce, I just think that I don't know if it can be replaced. So maybe direct to consumer would be something we would see if the restaurants are not going to be there. And I think that there might be a need for it, but I don't know if I personally I don't think that we are going to be able to cut out distribution. One trend we were seeing before COVID hit was a lot of private equity getting into distribution and consolidation of distribution. I see that continuing to happen. So we were seeing the middle size distribution being taken in with private equity, and I think that will continue. But I do think that the distribution centers are going to still exist. I think that I think this food box program that has happened is going to continue. I think that it's something that if we can get it right, I think that it's something that will carry on. Maybe the restaurants will continue to be markets that can help people get their groceries in a fashion. I know that Panera is doing really well with their market. I know that Potbelly's is doing really well with their market. So I think that I know CPK is doing really well with their market. So I think that restaurants that are taking on this market approach are going to continue with their market. And I think these to-go orders are going to continue to go as well. I think those are some of the trends that we're going to continue to see. But I personally believe that the distribution channels are going to continue to be there, because I think you're going to have to get the product that's in the West Coast out, and I think you're going to have to continue to see that. Does that answer your question? There was a lot of questions intertwined there, so.
I know, and I'll try and be more brief and succinct with my questions so we can tackle them. I'm also want to encourage everyone on this call, because we have a lot of knowledge out there.
Yeah,
to start typing things in the chat, or I can't see if they raise their hand, but you know, if you want to interject, please, you're welcome to do so. You talked a little bit last time also, and I'd like to spend a little more time on the labor market aspect of this, right? I mean, we're only going to cut through this as an economy if we look not just at the product, but where the dislocations of people's jobs are, and when we get them reemployed, are they going to basically be reemployed in the jobs they had before, or do you see there being different tasks that they have to do? Certainly, you, I think, touched on, some other speakers did, the number of people who are underemployed who've stepped up to volunteer, but ultimately we want to get them back in the productive economy. Do you see any shifts going on? Because again, all these folks who are tackling problems, I want them to think about where the puck or the ball or the balloon is going to be at the end of this, not just where it is now, COVID, and not necessarily going back to where it was pre-COVID.
So one of the things I was excited about with this box program was to bring people back from furlough to the distribution centers to help do the boxes. In reality, like my Michigan distributor is packing 60,000 boxes a week. So I said to him, what's it like? You know, I've been asking everybody for feedback. And so he said, you know, the first week, obviously ramping up is like, you know, always hard, you know, because they were doing 1,000 boxes a week. Now they're doing 60,000 boxes a week. He said, you know, the drivers were doing 3 days a week of delivery. Now they're going 5 days a week. So everyone is getting back into it. Some of their people came back, and now they're doing packing boxes where they were pickers. So they have to do some new tasks. They had to hire from temp agencies. So they're getting people they're reemploying, they're doing new jobs that they hadn't done before. So they're bringing people from places where they're bringing them into new positions, and they're taking people from other positions. They're hiring brand new crews, but they're getting to bring back their other crew as well, because some of the businesses are starting to pick up in other states as well. So like one of our distributors in Arizona got a big box contract, but Arizona's business is also picking up on the restaurant side. So they're getting to hire new crews as well. So I think there's going to be a little mixture of both.
And pickers can be seasonal work, right? Regional and seasonal work. So
Oh, sorry,
are people
pickers in my warehouse are a little bit different. Sorry, pickers for us
different?
are
Okay.
they hear the order and they pick from the slots.
Great. Thanks for
Not picker.
clarifying.
Sorry, not pickers of
Not crop
produce.
pickers.
Pickers. Yeah,
Got
sorry.
it. Okay. So it wasn't difficult to find those people and say, hey, we need you back. You've got a new task, maybe a little bit of retraining, right?
Right. Yeah.
What about the boxes themselves? Has that created a new economy for packaging that's different? Is that just a pivot from the way things were packaged before, or is there demand now for, whatever a box looks like from a paper goods or plastics goods supplier?
I think I'm not sure exactly what the boxes are going to look like, but there's definitely an increase in these boxes. These were not something that anyone was purchasing prior.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also heard you mention the other day that you were part of a proposal to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but that someone else got picked. I come having spent half my career in the private sector and half of it working both in the legislative and executive branches of the U.S. government. So I'm clearly part of the problem as much as part of the solution. But describe to us a little bit how that process worked and how that process can be fixed. There are a couple of the work streams that are working on policy proposals as much as they are on technical things. And I know from the agencies I've worked for that, and we've heard this certainly from Health and Human Services and other folks on the medical side, that they're not going to try and pick just one winner, but they are going to do multiple awards, right? So it's been frustrating for some who have proposed things on medical, agriculture, other things that they haven't quite gotten the feedback that they need about why they weren't selected so they can refine it and co-create a better solution. I think that's just a throughput issue, honestly, with the folks I'm talking with back in Washington. Nonetheless, help us all understand the process you went through, and then some of us who are in a position to do so would like to help you figure out how to take that intellectual capital you've already invested and get, whether it's a state or a local entity, to pick up your turnkey proposal and maybe adopt it as theirs, even if USDA does or doesn't do a second round. How do we help you get that across the finish line?
So there was 500 proposals that were there. And it was, it was, the whole idea was that it was a quick, it took a week for you to bid it, and then they took a week to decide, and then it was a week to implement it. So I think it was one of the quickest things that they've done at AMS. So there really hasn't been much answers why we didn't receive it. I don't know if it was because we did a national bid. We bid for Guam, Virgin Islands. We bid for the whole country, including all of those parts. And I'm not sure if they wanted a more regional approach. So I truly believe that we could have 100 distributors involved, and it would be all these different, businesses across the country. We could do it in small pieces and big pieces. The proposal we have, I think, is really amazing because we have these really great, 501c3s involved that have this turnkey approach to get to rural areas. And they were really excited about it. So that was the part that was probably the biggest letdown for us more than anything, because they were really excited to help the people that they were, being Health Corp. And
please remind the folks, in case any weren't on your previous call, or those of us who've had a lot of other input since then, what would it actually do?
Okay, so what my turnkey solution proposal was is we have basically 60 distributors that I didn't overbid the boxes. So some of my distributors were able to make like 60,000 boxes a week. We bid between 4,000 and 5,000 boxes a week for about 60 distributors across the country, to be able to go to either through Feed the Children, Save the Children, local YMCAs, or Health Corp, and to build these boxes that were about 18 to 22 pounds. They had like 4 or 5 apples, oranges, celery, carrots, potatoes, onions, If they didn't have to have a US product, we could add bananas. They had a mystery produce product, which was really a pick of the week, so that it could have a local item in each week in it, because I wanted to make sure that we had, you know, Georgia peaches and we had stuff from DC, that kind of thing. And then they were going to be delivered each week through this network, and the organizations themselves had boots on the ground to be able to do the next step that would get it to the end consumer. So we had a plan written out for each organization. So for example, Save the Children we would get it to a school, and then school buses were going to get it to the most rural areas. There was some plans for some Indian tribes, Indian nations as well. And we had it programmed through December basically, but it could go on as long as we had funding.
And what was the funding ask from USDA to get it to work?
Each box was about, I think it was $21. It was $21, but it depended on how much, really there was some areas that were more, like for example, if we were going to Puerto Rico, there was a freight charge that was a little bit more. And there was 2 areas in the Dakotas that we weren't able to reach. So there was a few like caveats, and there was a few caveats. So in Guam, there was some extra charges and some places like that, but it was about $21 a box.
And the logistics, you say you'd get it there, was that one of your own existing partners in this consortium or one of your existing business relationships, or
Yeah.
were you seeking an outside?
No, they were all our distributors within our network.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. So anyone out there on these calls who wants to, figure out a way to get this funded separately or has ideas, and then were there any other sort of in-kind contributions as part of this team that you put together to do this?
Sorry, one more time.
Were there any other sort of in-kind or financial contributions among the partners you named, YMCA, Feed the Children, Save the Children, Health Corps, or were they just the last mile end distributor partner?
So for the there was a small fee in there for the last mile for the I get confused between Save the Children and Health Corp, because they had to use some of their transportation to get to those places for those. So it was broken down where they were doing the last mile within that $21 fee though.
Okay.
Yeah.
And have you applied with this model for any other sources of grants or funding besides USDA, or is it sort of sat on the shelf?
It was all within the last few weeks, and it was all drafted for that particular, for that.
But the agreements, the conversations are already still in place, so you could ramp this up fairly quickly. If there's a second round at USDA or a state, health and
Exactly.
Agriculture system says, we want to do this here, you'd be able to potentially do that on a smaller regional or state by state scale, you think?
Exactly.
Okay, good. Well, let's take a look, and Peter, jump in too, because while I've been talking, maybe you've been reading some of the questions.
Here in the chat, yeah. So
I have one question too. When
right,
you get done with the chat.
start it off.
Dan, why don't you jump in and
So
do yours?
I have a couple friends that own this business.
Yeah.
I have this own this business called Perfect Pact, and they received a contract from they applied for and got a contract from the USDA on this whole program to distribute 1 million cases by the end of June.
Yeah.
So they're distributing really throughout the country, but they're focused quite a bit in Ohio, and they're calling, it's 1,000 truckloads across the next few weeks, the 21-pound boxes, same as you described them. Mm-hmm. So what is it that, since I missed some of the interim, what is it that you're trying to add to the whole equation here? Because it seems that the USDA had more people apply for the distribution.
I had 500 people apply.
Right. So my Perfect Pack people got 1 million cases. So what are you trying to add to the whole process here and get funded? I'm kind of missing
just for these specific 501c3s.
Okay, but aren't the 501c3s receiving the product for free?
Yeah, but they Save the Children, Feed the Children, those organizations did not receive anything from the people. Most of the people that received it were the food banks in general.
Okay.
So these organizations, because I applied with those organizations, did not receive these boxes.
So I was involved because I'm active in the Cleveland Food Bank as a donor and sort of a consultant. I got this people from Perfect Pack connected with the Cleveland Food Bank who are taking a significant part of.
Exactly.
And Cleveland Food Bank is part of the Hunger Network, but they operate and service the people in North Houston, Ohio directly. And they have 100 or 1,000 different drop-off points around this.
Exactly. So whoever won the bid chose whatever 501c3 they wanted to work with.
Right. To make it easy. They wanted to go to places that they could have truck unloading capacity, docks the trucks can back, all that kind of stuff, and be able to unload pallets, because it's a lot of boxes to be able to handle. If you have people have to unload them one by one, it takes forever. So they were looking for mechanized.
So for us though, we wanted to be able to go into the rural areas. So it depended on whoever you were partnering with. So for us as a national organization, I was trying to get into with these exact people to be able to do that. It depended on whoever your proposal was with.
Okay.
Well, I've got Dan's attention. Before we move on to a couple of good questions from Christine and Ebony. Dan, help us understand from your perspective, and get Melissa as well, this sort of regionality, right? So does it make a difference? Well, I'll go to Christina's question, which is, I'd like to understand how the national distributor network is structured for fresh produce. What are the barriers to very small growers to establish local micro networks? Either of you can jump in, but because you said a couple of things there, Dan, while we're thinking about that question, in the Cleveland experience or the greater Ohio experience, were any new jobs created or any people reemployed as a result, or was this purely a play to get food into the hands of the hungry through this USDA program and what you got, the 1 million cases through Perfect Pack?
Well, so my understanding is that, and Melissa's right, that a high percentage of the produce comes from California, or if it's citrus, maybe Florida. But in places like Ohio, there's a lot grown too. It's obviously seasonal, but there's lots of tomatoes and cucumbers and apples and things that are growing here too. So
and milk and
right. So there's I believe that the intention was to try to help out as many local farmers as they can, although it's early in the season right now. So there's not as much as there would be if it were August or September. So my understanding from talking to my two buddies in wellness is, they're going to try to work with some local as much as they can, but they're not going to be able to get a lot of the products that are grown, in either the South or the West Coast markets. So my understanding is some jobs were created locally, but probably not. It's probably more of it is out in the areas that Melissa was talking about, where the significant amount of the produce is.
And I think this goes to our expectations as consumers. So if you could wrap that into your answer too, Melissa, which is, we've become accustomed in the modern economy, the global economy, to be able to get pretty much anything we want any time of year fresh, if we're willing to pay what it takes to do that, which goes sort of into Ebony's question, which I would ask as a follow-up anyway. What about the added challenges with food supply chain and the international growers in the Caribbean and elsewhere? Obviously, we know Mexico, NAFTA, and the new USMCA. Tell us, Melissa, because again, you focused a lot on your geography, but obviously the inputs outside of it.
So, well, I mean, one of the things for this USDA program is it has to be grown in the U.S. But I mean, so one of the things I would say though is that, for example, in Boston, a local grower received, a local growing consortium received these boxes. His whole plan was to do it on the local, but he doesn't have product right now. So he's turning to subcontract it to one of the distributors I work with to handle it until the local product is available. For the local though, the distributors that I work with have robust local programs. They take a lot of these local growers. I mean, in my network, we vetted thousands and thousands of local distributors. And when the local product is available, we sell tons of local product. And that was one of the biggest reasons at the beginning of this that I kept saying, we cannot let our supply chain get disrupted and you know, quite frankly, end, because that will be the end of local grower for local growers as well, because we put a lot of them in of the restaurants. When they're available, we sell them as much as we can, because a lot of our customers want local whenever it's available. So that is really the, you know, the best thing that we can do.
You made a comment earlier, which I think goes to one of the questions we had about understanding the traceability system being used to track produce from the farm, that it's not, only the big guys, you said, would really sort of gain a value out of the investment in IT. I think there's also a concern, conversation had with Peter last week before this all began with one of our other presenters in preparation, that, you know, ultimately a lot of these tracking technologies, unless they are accretive to the bottom line of the farmer, the smallholder farmer, the producer, right? They're nice to haves, but do you see in the current situation that any of these things are going to be stuff that people will see a return on investment on enough to put the resources to, or is that sort of gone with the wind for the moment until the economy gets back? Sorry, lost you there a second. If anyone else wants to jump in while Melissa's moving around with a comment or a question, we'll take it.
While we're waiting, Babatunde, do you want to, is there any parallels you see between what you've heard so far about the US supply chain and what's happening in Nigeria with the farmers you work with?
Okay, thank you so much, John Peter. I think in Nigeria, the situation is a bit different with the food supply chain. And the way it works is that for local farmers, there are different businesses. Let me give example for local farmers. If you are working in the northern state, if you are working with maybe Babanguna is a social enterprise that buy from farmers. They basically focus on it. What they do is they train farmers on good agricultural practices, and at the end of the day, supply inputs to farmers, and at the end of the day, they actually purchase that from farmer and they sell to Nestle. That is how it works. But in general, most smallholder farmers, how they work is after production, every community have a village market, and the village market runs at least once a week. So that is where they sell their produce. But if you are into maybe perishable goods like tomato, pepper, and the likes, one of the problems they are still facing is high post-harvest losses. And that is why most times farmer loses about 40 to 60% of their commodity to post-harvest losses, especially when it comes to perishable goods. So the system is not really efficient as it stands right now. The system is not efficient because where most consumers are, you see most consumers are in the city. The bulk of the product from the north comes to the south, and the south, where they come to the south, is in Ibadan and Lagos State. That is where most of the product from north comes from. But in terms of logistics, they are not organized, like let's say, they are not formalized logistic companies in Nigeria. Most of the logistic companies operating, they are more of informal companies. They are just, maybe a farmer knows them, they just bring products from the north to the south. But there are few logistic companies, but it's not really structured, and there is no policy backing them, maybe backing them or supporting them. So the problem is almost in most West African countries. In Ghana is still a bit better. Especially their export. Their export is a little bit structured than the local food chain is also structured better than Nigeria. But I just see that I think in the past few years, some companies came up to use technology to control the food supply chain. And one of the companies, Farm Crowdy came, Farm Funded came, and what they do is they have a platform where they register their farmers and they buy directly from farmers. But for now, they are still seen as a middleman. And as a middleman, they make more profit than the farmer. So it's still a challenge. It's still a challenge. And another thing that is a challenge is traceability. You don't know the product coming to Lagos. You don't know which farm it's coming from. Everyone just know that it's coming from maybe Kano State or it's coming from Abuja. But you don't know where in Abuja is it coming from. So it's still a big challenge, and also it's an opportunity.
All right, thank you for sharing that, Tunde. Melissa back with us now, or are you still off?
I don't see her yet, and she's still muted,
right.
so
She's
I'll
muted,
throw it open
right.
to anyone else. I mean, one of the, a couple of good questions I see are really mostly directed to her, but anyone else who wants to jump in with a comment rather than typing it and jump in orally, please do.
I'm still missing what the funding request or goal is here. I'm not positive I understand the project, if I'm referring it to the right terminology.
Well, from what I gather is she put together one of the bids to participate in that USDA program, but was not down selected. One of the concerns, I've seen it myself directly from the inside and heard it from others more recently, is that when you're not getting selected, you're not getting the kind of feedback you need to understand. Did you miss the mark by a mile? Were you in the ballpark? Were you, is there an opportunity to come back with a revised bid and participate in the program? And she had expressed a little bit of that frustration. So, again, while we've got work streams who are working on policy recommendations, one of them is simply, if they are well equipped to participate in this program, but did too broad a proposal and it's the localized ones like the one you are involved with in Ohio, then, how do we communicate that better, right? This was all done, as she said, very quickly with a week to respond, a week to down select, and a week to implement. And there are plenty of other good ideas out there not getting funded. One of the questions I saw pop up is, what are the possibilities getting it funded state and locally? But I think, again, they have access to a supply and there is unmet demand. And how do we match that better? The other, when she comes back, I'll ask her this, but others may have some thoughts. Part of what she expressed in her last talk was unfamiliarity or lack of relationship in the segments which were not already her customers, right? So she's had to undergo a very labor-intensive process to get to know people who were not her traditional supply chain and customers.
Yeah, the type of company that actually got this.
I'm sorry, say it again, Dan.
The type of company that actually got this is what my buddies do is the Department of Defense puts out a contract saying we need, 68 cases of apples for military bases or whatever. So this company generally fulfills that kind of contract. They go find the apples. They go get them from the farmers, so they're used to distributing really large amounts of miscellaneous stuff in a short time period, and knowing how to source it, how to transport it. And so that probably gave these guys an advantage because the USDA has a history dealing with them and said, yeah, these guys can handle 1 million boxes, take it, right? And so it might be different than what Melissa was trying to do.
Right, and it is very hard to put together a 501c3 and a consortium. I see Andrew Mack has popped on his video, so maybe he's prepared to say something. When you are, turn on your microphone and—
Ready. Go ahead. Sorry, my apologies. It's been back to back today. I really wanted to be on this one.
Melissa has had to take I think attending to her child break, which I know you're sympathetic to with your 2 boys.
That's where I was, sorry.
I gave her a chance while you weren't there to defend the intermediary's vital role in pulling all of this together, because as we out, and try and get direct from farm to table, there are still quality control issues. There are still, there is still value added in the value chain by wholesalers and distributors. And part of what we were about to touch on before Melissa had to step away was, how do we broker different relationships than the ones that already exist? She had to start from scratch as her business line altered drastically, right? And so, it's not just your Agrimovio tool's ability to match, batch, and pay, but also to have more of a heads-up display of what's out there that's getting underutilized, and someone can jump on and say, oh, those apples, as Dan referenced, are exactly what I'm looking for, and not in the sort of DoD logistics sustainment model, which clearly his friends, have cracked the code on long ago. What do you have to say, Andrew?
So thanks, Bob. Yeah, I mean, the truth is that the best model, even for small farmers, is not the same in every instance, right? You're right. Intermediaries exist in part because they provide a function. The question is only whether the function that they provide is priced appropriately, number one, and number two, whether it's necessary in all instances. We talked to the placeros, the people who sell in the plaza in Bucaramanga, and they said, yeah, we'd like to go direct. So that's good news for the farmer, and that's good news for the placero. But there may be some places where that's not viable. There may be some places where the quality control issues are an issue. The key thing and the approach that we've taken is to try to put the power as much as possible in the hands of the farmer, and to put options in the hands of both the farmer and the purchaser, so that even if I'm a farmer and my options are maybe to go direct, but also maybe to go through an intermediary, maybe that I could see 2 or 3 potential intermediaries or 2 or 3 potential options. That gives me power as a producer, even just the ability to compare one to another. And I think that's good for the ecosystem long term, because it drives down the waste that's inherent in the system when there's only one single point of failure. And we're seeing that even in the United States, where everything rolls up into a small number of big, hub points in our food system. There's real danger in that if the conditions change, and if that system isn't equally available to everyone. A system that has both the ability to go big and go small is a safer, more resilient system.
Others, if I can see your picture, I'm going to probably call on you. John, were you about to say something, John Poor? Looks like
sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Thanks.
Perfect. So I'm really curious, especially going off of Andrew's comment, to do with vertical integration of a supply chain within agriculture. There's for a long time been major separations between the individual small farms, or even the larger farms, and what we're talking about with the intermediaries. And I'm curious, it would have to be executed in a very strategic way so that all parties' interests were aligned. But what would happen if we had more backwards integration with these intermediaries actually acquiring a stake in the individual farms, and the farms acquiring a stake in the intermediary? And the reason I say that is then Melissa would all of a sudden have people within her company who are selling to her as a distributor, and also selling to these individuals that she's disconnected from at the moment. She would have the expertise within her organization that are connected on both sides of the equation. So is that happening in agriculture at the moment, outside of Costco and these other groups? And what would be the consequences or benefits to that?
Andrew, you look like you're
I'd be happy to jump in. So it takes different forms, right? So if you think about it, John, an outgrower scheme is a kind of this vertical integration that you're talking about, right? Where I'm the purchaser, I agree to purchase X percentage of your goods at some sort of fixed price, and I'm going to help you finance the seed and that kind of thing. So there are different kinds of vertical integration in different places around the world. I mean, the reason that there's a separation is because it's a hell of a lot of money and it's a hell of a lot of risk. And if you think about it, the greatest efficiency is in doing the thing that you do well, really, really well, right? So in our instance, trying to get the farmer to have to do just farming and not also transport is a big benefit. And I think that there's nothing that prevents now large processors, for example, from doing their own producing, right? But when we've spoken with them in the field, what they say is, yeah, we want to do that as a fail-safe so that we know that there's a certain core of, you know, super high quality stuff that we can call on, and we'll never be without supply. But, you know, being a farmer is actually fairly risky and it's fairly capital intensive. And a lot of the people who are good at producing and exporting, from what we've been able to hear, are really interested in having fewer of those, not more of those responsibilities.
I see Melissa is not only back, but back in her seat, and we're sympathetic to whatever pulled you away. So thanks for coming back.
One of the
things I wanted to get into, because I also don't want to steal Dylan's thunder for some of the questions that are related to what he'll do when we get to the frozen and packaged food. But we had a couple of questions about the international aspect of the supply inputs. I think that's right about where we were when you had to step away. Not only seasonality, but also, you know, crop substitution, right? If something is, for whatever reason, drought, famine, not in supply, how does that work for you in your distribution network, Melissa?
I mean, unless it's like a true act of God, meaning that there's just been, I mean, like the last romaine, like the terror, like, you know, with the romaine recalls, that's probably like the, you know, what we've really seen, the worst we've really seen. Outside of that, there's just been, so, I mean, you know, like, I mean, I'm trying to think.
Let me pose it another way, though. You had made a comment the other day that because of this new reality you're facing right at the moment, you are having to work hard to create new relationships, right? Your relationships were strong to your suppliers and to your customers. And with this disruption, and I'm thinking again, what the hackathon participants are looking at, which is, can we create a way where it's easier for you to see somewhere else on the globe? And I made this comment on one of our other sessions. It's what the power distribution industry calls, you know, a load control center. When there's a blackout in one part of their grid, they can figure out where the other assets are to turn them on, or how they can wheel power from another grid onto theirs. And do we have in place something that makes Melissa's job easy when she realizes, you know, we've had a blight of apples and I need to find another source, and I don't have those relationships in place now, but I need to. And rather than, you know, picking up the phone and sending your emails, is there a better way for you to build these new relationships? And you can use the experience you just had of, you know, trying to find these NGOs. You obviously have a good network, YPO and other things, but what would make that easier for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think having just some of the, I think having a source like you're just, you know, like with the NG, well, I'll give you an example. I mean, you know, Dan spoke about how he had the person in Ohio that had, you know, the boxes, but like if there was a program like this, one of my distributors had, you know, 60,000 boxes. And at one point he was looking for NGOs to be able to, or 501c3s, that's how they were turning it, to be able to work with, because he had too many boxes and the food banks only needed a certain amount. So he was starting to look for other places to go. And the governor actually stepped in and helped him find some religious organizations to give the boxes to. But would there have been another place to be able to connect to find those? And Andrew, when you were giving your, you know, conversation, I think there would be like a good thing. when I asked the question on the food safety, but like, we always want to know, like, is there a good way to look not on quality, but food safety of the growers? So like, what are their GAP, practices? What are their SOPs? Do we make sure that the growers that we're working with aren't, they don't have livestock close to their, to their plants? What are their hand washing stations? Are there hand washing stations close to where they're planting? Just some of the regular GAP certification kind of things that they're using. All of that stuff. And how do you teach the general SOPs that are necessary to make sure that the products are, as safe as they can be, for that kind of stuff.
So if I could just I think your Ohio case, since I'm from Ohio, right, is part of what we've been on the phone all morning trying to figure out, is whether there's a way to, to be a little bit of that arranger in this instance, because there is a lot of goods that just aren't they're already in the system that aren't finding a home efficiently. Right. So I think if there's a real opportunity to fix that, then your question about trying to guarantee certain levels of quality, I think that's also really important. Most intermediaries, at least in the developing world, really aren't in the quality business so much as they are in the business of taking risk. And the person who is the purchaser on the back end just says, yeah, I'll take this load, or no, I won't, or, and so I think that the idea to get to the top, to push best practice to the top across the board is really, if you will, a pull toward good behavior is better than a focus on trying to discipline bad behavior, just in part because I think our disciplinary measures are weak. Think about certification. You're certified at a certain point in time, and then that certifier leaves, and it's a hard thing it's a hard thing to guarantee over the long haul. So one of the things we certainly want to do is to try everywhere we can to push into the system these higher standards, and to get people to recognize them on the purchaser side, so that my incentive as a producer is, yeah, I want to be on that train. I want to be on the organic train. I want to be on the certified train. Make more money.
Right. I noticed we're getting close to the end of the hour. Peter, I just want to ask, will this Zoom call drop off? Are people invited to stay a little bit longer, or how are we doing?
It's not going to drop off at all. So if people want to stay on a little bit longer, we still have 2 hours till Dylan's call begins. So we're not going to stay on another 2 hours. but if you want to stay 10 to 15 minutes, it's okay.
Melissa, how's your time frame?
Oh, I'm fine.
Okay. Well, no harm, no foul. If anyone feels the need to drop off, I want to also make sure we get in as many questions as we can. Sindhu asked a question that we were starting to touch on a moment ago about state and city level funding for your 501c particularly, but I think with Dan chiming in and a few others, we realize there may be some state-by-state solutions. Certainly there are state departments of agriculture and state-run agencies that are looking at solving the same problem too. Does that work at your scale, Melissa, or is it disaggregable on a state-by-state basis or a municipal basis, or do you have to operate regionally for it to work at the price point you developed?
Oh, no. We can work state by state too. I mean, it's the, as Dan definitely, as they pointed out, we're doing this, I have my list. I think 12 of our distributors are doing it through the USDA program, so it can work there too. And I've had 501c3s approach us, and we're going to do this for 501c3s on their own. I think the box method itself is just such a good idea, and to be able to bring more people to work is such a good idea. And the food service distributors are very good at doing this. This is how, I have a picture of the box. Peter, do you want to just show what the box looks like? How we can
bring that up 1 second.
Yeah. So this is at the ultimate level, how it can be packaged in these bags. I don't think that needs to be, but this was an example of a hospital who wanted to have everything in individual bags. A lot of the boxes now just have all the produce loose within the boxes, but I just want to show you, for example, how these boxes are looking. So this is an example.
Well, I've heard a lot of home delivery from grocery store models are being rethought. because, you know, people don't, it happens here locally, you know, if the guy shows up and he's picking things out of the back of his car and handling them before giving you the box, they don't want that, right? They want the box delivered, left at the door, let it,
Yeah.
you know, let it get laid down for COVID before coming inside. Well, that's
Exactly.
interesting.
So this is what a box looks like. And so this would take like more time for a distributor to be able to put this in these individual bags. But so a lot of distributors have now turned to either having the growers pack these bags before it even hits the distributors, or having these items loose in the box. But like for George Washington Hospital, they wanted everything in individual bags. This is my distributor in Chicago, so this is separate, but I did the same thing with Keeney Produce in Maryland. So this is what it would look like, and it was broken down, and then each of these things were put into a half bushel box. So you can do like a bushel box or a half bushel. It depends on what size you want, and then this went into it. So depending on the actual 501c3, we'd then be able to customize what the box is. The USDA box program has a few different types of boxes. It has a box like this, like that just mixed fruits, and then it has a dairy box. It has a box that's a mixed box, so it has one that has the cooked meats, so chicken, you can think like chicken nuggets and cooked taco meats. I had one distributor doing spare ribs. I think before she bid that before it got really tight in some of the meat packing processing areas. Yeah, and so I see someone said something about CSA, but so I think some CSAs are doing this, and I just saw, I think CSA boxes are another great way of doing this. I saw one of the YMCAs I'm working with in Boston is doing a CSA box. I know some of the CSA boxes use some of the other products like bok choy, and some of these other things would be really interesting to have be another alternative. This is just one of the ones that I am interested, this is what my world is, and this would help that supply chain where the restaurants weren't buying. And so all of this stuff was kind of going, this is the stuff that was being, you know, plowed under or being spilled out because, you know, the usage is just not there. So this is just my world, but I think CSA is another great opportunity.
Dylan made a comment back to Ebony that I don't want to steal his thunder from his presentation, but while we have you here, it harkens back to what we discussed the other day, which is, you know, where the demand and supply of fresh is still not being matched and we're at risk of waste a lot. How easy is it for you to divert what is normally stays fresh into frozen, packaged, preserved, canned, pickled, whatever? And because Dylan also mentioned food industry associations in his reply to Ebony, maybe if he's willing to speak up, but maybe you can too, how do we help you build relationships to divert that portion of your supply chain that is just not going to get into someone's hands so that it doesn't go to total waste or to compost? You know, there are trade associations for packaged goods, for what used to be called the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which is now the Consumer Brands Association. There are also standards that the trade associations set for their members, which is an alternate form of regulation besides USDA and FDA. Help me understand first, Melissa, if there's a pivot afoot for you and how we as part of the hackathon can help you think through that. But also if Dylan's willing to speak up now, and if not, or if he's still even on, I'm looking through the screens here to see who's still with us. We can ask him that from his standpoint later, but I want to get your input before we hear from him, please.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some IQF stuff, the frozen stuff, but that isn't really one that we've done too much of. I honestly don't know, and I'm interested to listen to his, I don't know if they buy from the same or if they grow their own. I'm interested to hear. I know that some of my buyers do work with and sell to IQF, but I'm not 100%.
So you haven't been hearing from new potential customers on the IQF or other packaged industry side saying, hey, you know, can you give us a price so we can put your stuff into our products as opposed to.
It wasn't during COVID. It's been before COVID. We've just had some and it was more for some of our customers that also have a line of IQF
Okay.
product. So some of our customers like sell their brands as IQF or as frozen. Does that make like not TV meals, but that idea?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I'd be interested to hear. I honestly don't know too much about that side of it.
And I'll just ask you sort of the open-ended question while I read to see if there are any more last-minute chat questions. You know, what is a win for you at the end of this hackathon on the 31st? What can be delivered? You've added so much value to us. What can we do to help you achieve whatever it is you're doing, both on your commercial side and on your more philanthropic side in this moment?
I mean, any leads or any new ideas on how to be able to carry our project further and get, you know, more, get this to continue to go, I mean, would be wonderful. I think any of these ideas, and honestly, just being able to talk to everyone and explain more about this has been a big enough, you know, win. But really, I mean, any way to continue the box program or to help another distributor to stay afloat would be a huge win for us.
Paint us a quick picture. What does your industry look like on the other side of COVID once we're in economic recovery mode? Does it look more or less the same way it was before, or has it been irreparably changed for the better or worse on the other side?
I honestly think that the distributors are going to be stronger, and they're going to be smarter about we could say drops, so the deliveries that they do. I think that I think that they're going to there's going to be some that do more deliveries to consumers or more of these box programs. One of the other things we do is I hope there's less waste. I think that's one of the things we do a lot of, like bringing in special products. So we bring in like a special cut of like an item. And I hope that when we do that, we do it with like a smarter eye to the future, because that beginning of this whole situation was heartbreaking. So I just, you know, I hope that is there. And I really hope that, you know, learning from this, that we are able to pivot quickly in any type of situation, because it was definitely a stressful time, and no one could think that the entire restaurant industry would close, you know, within 24 hours.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things we learned on the seafood is that, you know, Americans are particular. I think it's true with beef and every other thing, you know, where there are lots of other parts of the animal that go to other parts of the world because Americans expect a certain cut, size, quality, etc. I know my mother and grandmother, who were products of the Depression, could make amazing dishes with the less desirable cuts of things because that's how they grew up, and plus their ethnic heritage. I wonder, and I'm just saying this out loud for everyone's benefit, you know, whether we're going to see a change in the palate, or at least the price sensitivity of the consumers for at least a period before we get back to that. And hopefully that will impact the waste of the byproducts that is sort of part of what American agriculture has become in recent years, or those things, those parts that are byproduct get shipped elsewhere in the world as opposed to consumed domestically. I know that just anything but the chicken breast is in more demand outside the US because chicken breast has become what it is. And a couple of years ago, I had this conversation with someone who was trying to find an aftermarket for all the other parts of the chicken that didn't get processed in the US. So right. That's my view on where things may change. I'm just speculating. If anyone else has something else they want to chime in and say orally, I feel obliged to let people go so they can have a break before we go to the next session. Otherwise, I'll give you the last word, Melissa, and then Peter, back over to you.
I'm available if anybody has any questions about their particular project or wants to run any ideas by me. our trade association in the fresh produce is United Fresh and PMA. Those are our two trade associations. I saw that in the questions. And yeah, the program I spoke of, as Dan mentioned, is completely running, and it's happening across the country, and it's the Farmers to Food Box program. So it is happening. I was saying specifically for the 501c3s that I was working with, they have not received the boxes. YMCAs have, but the ones in particular, some of the ones I was speaking with hadn't done it. So it was more the Feed the Children, Save the Children, and Health Corp that I was speaking on. So I just don't want to make it seem like that program did not happen. And yeah, that's really it.
All right. Peter, back to you.
Yeah, Melissa, thank you very much for taking a second, sharing your insights and giving feedback to other people's ideas. Dan, thank you as well for more sharing as well. And Bob, again, thank you for moderating this whole session. And I'm glad we got input from a lot of the participants as well this call. I look forward to seeing several of you on Dylan's call a little bit later.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.